All right. Hello, everybody. It looks like everyone is joining in here from the waiting room. So we'll give it a minute or two for everyone to get their settings set up and ready to rock and roll. Angela, I must say, I do love this new place that you moved to because whatever is behind you now looks like it is highlighting you, and it is actually a great frame for you. It looks very angelic almost.
It was accidental, but it is this magnificent door frame that was
Yeah.
salvaged from Mumbai, of all places, and turned into a mirror. So I'm kind of obsessed with it and loving that you like it just as much as I do.
Yeah. Very, very cool. All right. Looks like we got a bunch of folks that have now joined in. Skyrocketed by 20 people there in the last 30 seconds. So this is great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining Angela and I today on this webinar. And our focus for today is to really jump in and have a conversation around what the heck do you have and how are you going to sell it to a government customer? So for a quick background and introduction of ourselves, I'm Joey Arora. I'm the president here at the Outpost. We help companies grow and scale across the DoD and federal markets, helping them understand how to navigate that ecosystem and how do you actually get dollars on contract and transition to a program of record. We've done this with over 12 different companies to programs of record. We've helped over 165 companies win over 480 million in government contracts. And I've my past life, I've been an Air Force veteran. I've helped stand up AFWERX, TRAFI, TACFI program, and a deep experience on the Air Force side, help start companies, help raise money, and now really want to see the defense industrial base grow, which is why we're having these conversations. So, Angela, I'll pass it over to you.
Joey. I'm Angela Aspito. I'm the managing director for the Southwest Mission Acceleration Center, which is one of five in a national network of acceleration centers that are designed to help accelerate tech transition to DoD. So I'm sure you hear this a lot, right? You probably have heard of a handful of other groups like Naval X Tech Bridge and the Tech Groves were, back in the day, a part of the program, and other entities, all here to help you as a small business or you as a company developing a new emerging technology, get that tech to DoD. We are different and the same because we need to be both, right? But our mission is to help support the DoD directly as they seek technologies to find. So, tech scouting, tech matching, and then supporting the small businesses and founders on their journeys to become defense contractors is all a part of the services that we provide. I'm located in Phoenix, Arizona. There are other MACs in Washington State, Hawaii, Kansas, and Ohio, and maybe more to be coming online someday soon. But you can think of us as a resource for anything and everything that involves your defense go-to-market strategy development, and anything you might need in order to get questions, answers, connections back to DoD.
And Angela, I think you teed it up with that introduction of why are we here to have this conversation today? I think with all the companies that you have seen and the companies that we have worked with and talked to, there's this underlying question of, well, how do I get engaged with my government stakeholder? How do I find them? How do I engage in that first conversation to how does this add value? And I think we have folks, on that continuum here of companies that have never worked or never talked to a government stakeholder. I recognize some people on the call who have sold their product, found that product market fit, are in the conversations for programs of record today. And so, the things we're going to talk about here, we hope are applicable across this entire journey. And we want to dig into some of those stories. So, Anne and I were just going to have a conversation today about these things. And I want to start by busting a myth. And Angela, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. Is If you have a unique product, is that going to guarantee success in the military? Like you have this best product, it's like best commercial engagement, and a lot of people think yes, yes, it does. And the reality is no. You could have the coolest thing since sliced bread, and whether that be a laser gun, a space laser. Talking about lasers a lot today, they're on my mind. But if you have a new novel DevSecOps method, if you have a new brake pad that cools down faster, a new metamaterial, it might be the best in the world. But if you don't align that with the mission and the mission fit, it doesn't matter. And that I think is the number one thing a lot of companies don't get right. And it's hard because the translation from that commercial product to the DoD use cases and that mission fit, there's a language barrier. We're all speaking English, but the nuances of how do you speak the language, how do you frame the problem, what are the acronyms, what is the challenge that the user is facing is different in the military use cases than it is on the commercial use cases. And so you have to be able to communicate that in this process. And so, Angela, I'd love if you want to jump in and share some opinion on this, and then I want them to share a story as well.
From my perspective, you nailed it. So like the lexicon is the most foundational piece, right? This like, what does DoD mean when they say market research? What does DoD mean when they say we're going to be using research and development funding, right? Or the color of our money, right? And then, but it's not just a translation issue or a lexicon issue from DoD to industry, right? It's also a lexicon industry from a lexicon issue from industry back to DoD. And then I think when we start to throw VC and private equity into it, there's an additional layer of challenges. So one of the things that I try to work with companies on first and foremost is, do you understand what these words mean, right? And that might sound really silly, but I do think establishing the lexicon and understanding and being willing to share with any DoD folks you're interacting with what you mean when you say something is extremely important, because the faster you can get on the same page from a language perspective, the better, right? I think that's number one. And I don't know if you experience this too, Joey, because I know you guys do a lot of cyber support, right? But we in an OT support, translating what a request for proposal is asking is like the perfect way for me to give you an example, like a real life example of why lexicon is a challenge and has to be solved for first. So we were supporting a company that we work with in one of our accelerators as they were working on a SIBR, and there was a big misunderstanding, a huge chasm between what they thought they had to submit for key personnel and what the government requirements for key personnel were. Right. So that's, I think, a great example of like just the lexicon issue and the translation challenge. And then mission fit for sure. You might have the best product in the world, right? You might make the most effective, purple sparkly widget on the planet, right? But if the DoD doesn't understand how your amazing and incredible one-of-a-kind purple sparkly widget is going to advance the mission, make the warfighter more lethal, or save lives, you probably won't get very far.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think over the last few years, we've had some very public and high profile companies who have had DoD, they were commercial folks, they came in, were DoD insiders. And then the company thought they started a company and thought, hey, we understand the problems within the DoD. And they built products that were okay, hey, we're solving this problem. We're going to go out and address this. We know how to make this. We know how to solve this. And in a venture environment, right, you're encouraged to get to the product as fast as possible and get product market fit as fast as possible. I think the challenge with the DoD is that product market fit cycle can be longer. And if your end user is not in that conversation, which I think this company struggled with that process, they didn't find product market fit and burned through a lot of venture dollars and a lot of opportunity without deeply engaging and building what the stakeholder needed and built what they thought was right for the defense market. This works well in the commercial market because you can build for what the consumer wants and you can validate that by the sales process. And then you can take that and say, hey, we've already built this. We know the DoD needs it and work to tell that story. That's still a 12 to 24-month cycle. But you have validation over here in the commercial market. If you're going for a defense only product and you don't have that initial validation and you're building to where your users are at today, then you end up potentially building something that might not be a good fit for where their mission is today. And part of that comes to the lexicon Angela was chatting about. There's a lot to be said on how are they framing the problem. Uh, how big of a problem do they see this to be? What is the financial impact of this, right? Is this something that there is actual resourcing and budgeting behind? And that's something we can get into in a little bit later. But the lexicon piece is important, and I encourage companies to work with the Mac and work to have these conversations early to hire a veteran so that you can help translate and have that conversation to understand what does it mean to sell into the defense ecosystem, and encourage you to work with someone who has commercial capture experience. So, and when I say commercial in this instance, I mean they've worked for a commercial company, and that can be selling back to the DoD, and that's okay. And so that's a core part of what you want to look at as a company is who can speak this language for you. And if you are selling to a user that you might not have that background from, how how can you spend as much time with them as possible to learn how they talk, how they think, and understand where the money flows.
Yeah, I don't know if that's like a really good segue into, pet peeve of mine, but I'm gonna throw it out there anyways.
Yeah,
So I I I get frustrated. This is no founder's fault. Okay. So I'm just like full disclosure, like I don't blame anybody for this, right? But I think one of the things that comes up often that just sort of like puts my spidey senses up, and I'll tell you why it does in a minute, is when we will meet with a founder or we will meet with a company that is developing a new technology. And the first thing that they say is, well, we can do whatever the government wants as long as we get some funding for it. Tell me how much money you can give me, and I'll tell you what I can do. So it's a pet peeve for everyone, I'm sure, right? It's the equivalent of like, your kids coming and asking for 20 bucks and they didn't do their chores, and they're going to spend it on candy and things you don't want them to eat, right? It's terrible. So let me pull the thread. The reason why I get frustrated is because if you say that to a mission partner or someone at the DoD, like, you immediately signal you are here for the transaction, right? You are not here for the relationship. And in the space that we play in, especially when we're talking about 18, 24, 36-month timelines, right? Before technology is going to actually get into a program, or you're going to see a production contract for anything you'd be building, right? This is not a transaction. This is a relationship. There's so much that you need from the person who's going to help, the person who's going to be your technical point of contact, the person who's running the program, right? There's so much, the end user, et cetera, the contracting command, right? All these parts and pieces all come together to support you as the company developing a technology that's critical. If you start like the introductions or interactions with these companies or with the DoD by saying, yeah, let's talk about a contract, right? You've missed the point. And that is going to translate really poorly on the other side of the aisle, because across the DoD, everything is done and decided and defined by risk. So you walk in, first thing out of your mouth is, "We can build anything if you'll pay us for it," right? You've set off some red flags already, right? So this drives me nuts. And I spend a lot of time coaching our founders on what to say and what not to say. And that's a huge pet peeve of mine. I don't know if you have anything like that, but I'm throwing the pet peeve out there, Joey, because I think everybody needs to hear.
Angela, I appreciate you sharing that pet peeve, and I think afterwards I want to know what candy your kids really like that they're coming to bother you for that $20 every time. That's not what we're here to talk about today. I want to double tap on a part that you said there, that the government is looking at this from a risk perspective. I think there's a lot of desire right now to shift the conversation from defense only to dual use. They want to see and have an understanding that you are selling in a commercial market. The government does not want to buy bespoke things. There's, I'd say, almost only 2% of the DoD budget is unique and special. Maybe a little bit more than that, but like the things that I'm talking about, like are fighter jets and big carrier ships and things that go boom. But everything else that goes on to those platforms, that engages with those platforms, that are part of the development of those platforms, are dual use. There's applications for fighter jet technologies that have applications in the commercial world, on the jet engine technologies, on spacecraft, on the network connectivity on edge devices that happen on a carrier also happens in a smart city. And there are parallels in these markets, that there is a deep demand to say, how can we drive this story? And that recognition of dual use is also going to help buy down the risk. So how are you validating that, yes, I can go out and solve this problem? Well, show I've already solved it for a similar type of customer, and you can adjust that based off of what you're talking about.
Yeah, also with that idea of risk reduction, we've evolved in the last couple of years to stop thinking about enterprise level providers of things that we are going to end up commoditizing. So what do I mean by that,
Yeah,
right? Like drones, right? Unmanned aerial vehicles of all kinds, unmanned surface vehicles, any unmanned anything, right? We're
yeah,
on the path to commoditize those capabilities. And so the idea that there's going to be one provider of drones, group one UAS or group two UAS, or there's going to be, just a blue UAS list with 25 vendors on it, right? That is going to be what we use to procure, drones for the entire DoD enterprise, is kind of silly. So you're making a big mistake on the founder side if you are coming into the conversation and saying, "I'm the only one you need," right? Because the dialogue, isn't going in that direction. I don't know how closely you all are tracking, or for our folks that are joining us are tracking, but a couple of years ago, was 2 years ago, almost to be exact, NDAA language included the discussion of increasing and advancing the defense industrial base. So we actually have an assistant secretary of defense, right, for this purpose. And that office is designed to help build up more medium-sized businesses, right? So we want to elevate the number of smalls that become mediums, and we want to rely more heavily on that larger quantity of medium-sized businesses than we do today on the large primes that make up the defense industrial base. And so again, like, put all of these things together, right? And you start to see where you need to engage as a vendor of new things, right? Your goal is not to be the next Raytheon, right? Your goal is not to replace Raytheon, right? Your goal should be, as a small business or an entrepreneur, to build to 65 to 80 million dollars a year in whatever you do best, right? And then sustain that as a part of the future of the defense industrial base. And so we need to also be like adjusting on the industry side how we think about things, not just dual use, right? But also um, a multiplier inside of, the DIB.
yeah. And I think this leads into the next topic that we had set up, and so I appreciate your awesome segues today. The goal for the DID is to build more medium-sized businesses, but that timeline, that understanding of that timeline is often unclear for folks entering the DoD. To get one product that is at TRL 9, the Tech Readiness 9, that's the highest level, you've shown it's validated, it's been used in an operational setting, you're ready to sell it. If you have that, the timeline to get something like that on contract is 18 to 24 months. There's some shortcuts to get around that, leveraging OTs, CSOs, FARs, but any business that wants to meaningfully engage in the DoD needs to be prepared for a 2-year long sales cycle, and that is to get the first dollars in the door. So when we're talking about this effort to build more medium-sized businesses that are doing 10 to 50 to 100 million in revenue, that's going to take us 5 to 10 plus years. And I know there's a demand and a need to have more companies come in today and to expand our industrial base, but it just takes time to build capacity, to build facilities, to have the right people and the teams. So you have to take this as a long-term view and understand that your customers are also on that journey of understanding how do they sell to these particular organizations, and or how do they buy from a medium-sized company or a small company. The acquisition machine inside of the DoD is also shifting and changing. We can all argue that it's not happening fast enough, or if it is, but I think at the end of the day that we will see the proof in the pudding when we are seeing the defense industrial base truly grow, and we have 10 more Andurils, Shields, and companies like that that have stood up, and so we're beginning to get there.
This is where like we have to think creatively, you know. I try to refrain from judging progress, you know, in terms of timing, because this is a massive ship to turn. So, you know, we take it one inch or 1 degree, you know, in radius at a time. And I try to focus instead on like what's happening now, what can I do now, and then what do I think is going to happen next, so I can anticipate, right? And as I think about the founders that we're helping and that we support, and then the mission partners also, you know, across DoD that we're supporting, I can't help but think that there are a few commonalities between the situations where everything went really, really right, you know. And just to, you know, I don't have to necessarily elaborate on each of them, but, you know, first, the company understood, right, that they were going to have to put some time and energy and funding into developing a close to ready prototype that they could get in the hands of the warfighter. And they were willing to do that independent of a large contract, or, you know, a promise or commitment, right, of funding in the future. That's the second thing that I think that all of those companies have in common, is that they were willing to engage with the mission partner and meet like DoD where DoD was at. Right. So not trying to tell you to change your budget cycle, not trying to tell you, you know, to change your development timeline or the resource capability, but to just say, what is it that you're working towards and what do you need? And then adapt their development process and their sales process to match where DoD was. That was really the second, I think, majorly like awesome thing, overwhelmingly positive thing. And then the third is they were TRL 5. So, or higher, right? So, you know, you just, again, you have to adjust your expectations, I think, a little bit to your technical readiness level. And then on the second layer to the customer you're pursuing, and then on the third layer, the funding, right? And I see this as a really great place, Joey, for private equity or private investors to kind of come in. You know, so when we're not talking today about, you know, VC money, right, and investment into companies, you know, but I will say that I think there is a lot of conversation happening across the DoD about how VC fits into this equation of investing in companies that are dual use before they sell to defense, right? And providing a part of the de-risking component in this procurement cycle. I think there's a lot to that. And I also think that's really complicated. So in the absence of knowing like what every founder is doing to pursue investment or how they're funded, focusing on those other things, do you know the customer? Are you willing to meet the customer where they're at? Right. And are you willing to push, outside maybe your comfort zone a little bit as it relates to development timelines and funding pathways to get to the finish line in the first place?
Yeah, uh, I agree with everything you said, and we're starting to see some questions come in the chat. I encourage our attendees to use the Q&A function. This will help Angela and I track all the stuff that's coming in and make sure that we do get you a response. There's one question here that I think is quite relevant. It's how is building a small to medium company to a $50 million annual revenue consistent with VC funding that so many startups need? VCs often want much larger payout. And then in relation to that, we also got a question, how do startups even fundraise against these expectations as no VC is interested in a possible 24-month before you see anything on our return cycle? So I'll jump in and try to answer I'll answer the first question. If you're building a company that's selling in the defense tech ecosystem, I think you also have to look at, are you a dual use company or are you a defense only company? There are VCs out there that are focused on defense only companies. And how big is that market? Are they investing in companies that want that TAM? And their strategy for some of those companies, if you're building a munitions company, your total available market isn't going to be hundreds of billions of dollars. It's going to be low billion-dollar figures, potentially to a few $100 million figures. If you can capture a portion of that, then are they looking for a strategic M&A deal? Are they looking for you to sell your IP, right? So there's some pathways there that might make sense. But the real answer to that question is, if you're building a dual use business, getting the $50 million of DoD revenue is different than your commercial sector revenue. So you need to be bringing your commercial sector revenue in as well. So by the time you're hitting 50 to 100 million in DoD revenue, you could be doing $500 million to $1 billion in commercial revenue. So you take a look at the market, you're recognizing that the government market is going to be 5 years behind in market size than your commercial market. And you're even seeing this with Amazon and the rollout of the EKS stuff that they have. They are doing billions of dollars in the commercial sector, and they're doing tens of millions of dollars in the government. And that difference is, they recognize there's going to be a huge market for this in the government, and it just takes time to develop and get there. But they're leveraging the growth and investment from their commercial sector to facilitate the growth of the DoD market.
If I could add, Joey, I think I always hesitate to say that something is the answer for everyone, right? There's no silver bullet here. We have tools. We have a ton of tools in the toolbox that can be used in different ways in support of companies, depending on where they're at in their journey and where they want to go, right? So VC is not going to be the funding pathway for the majority of companies looking to get into defense tech. It's just not, right? Like we just need to acknowledge that. They're looking for truly unique investments that are going to make them billions of dollars, right? That doesn't fit a good majority of the 14 S&T priority areas that DoD is procuring under. Like that's just period, full stop, right? So we have to talk about other ways. There are a lot of other non-dilutive and then, equity-based or capital-based investment strategies and possibilities. Angel investors are one, right? But I am not an expert on that side of the funding pathway, but I will tell you, if you come to me or my team and you say, we're doing a pre-seed raise, and I'm going to say, what's your TRL, right? And if your TRL is anything higher than a 3, like you're at a TRL 4, then there are non-dilutive funding pathways available through R&D that are federal monies that you can also be exploring alongside that funding round that could get you just as far, and maybe not, if not farther, than what you're trying to accomplish with investor capital.
Absolutely. And I think you're also answering part of Dustin's question is that it's that early validation. And just because you get an R&D contract doesn't mean that that's validation. The good VCs know that that is just R&D money. It's not ARR. But if you have a customer that cares about your product, that cares about that long-term development, and there's a path to that program of record, and you're building the right relationships, you're solving a problem. Going back to that earlier conversation around mission fit, that's where you get that validation and then get potential venture funding to accelerate the growth to that direction.
Totally agree with you. I
Yeah.
also just want to acknowledge too that I think SIBRs are a really powerful tool that the government has set up, right, from the non-dilutive funding pathway perspective, but I don't think anyone knows how to use them. So,
I think
and
it's
I would say
extremely
like
underutilized.
underutilized, but then also like just the intention behind them is completely misinterpreted, right? So I'm gonna like rewind back to the beginning when we were talking about lexicon and like just throw in there that I think you need to understand the purpose of the vehicle you're planning to use. Like when you go and ask
Yeah.
for, investment money on a seed round, right? You're gonna have a terms sheet. Right. There's no terms sheet when you're talking about non-dilutive funding. You have to put in the work and take the time to understand what do I need to do inside of this particular, SIB or this phase one, right, in order to make an investment or a return on an investment for the government that I can leverage for myself in a phase two. It's not different. It's just linking these concepts and these ideas together so that you can build your pathway forward no matter what your funding source is.
Yeah. And it is, I want to share one of the secrets around SIR, and that is you have the ability to sole source the technology that you have developed under SBIR for the next 20 plus years, for forever in the future, right? The authority is there, and the Government Accountability Office just made a decision that even if that SBIR or STTR derived technology is a component of that entire system that you're trying to sell, you can use sole source, you can do sole source justification based off of the SBIR for the entire system if one of the components is derived from an SBIR or STTR project. And that's pretty amazing to unlock. But what you really have to do is you have to understand who those government stakeholders are, who care about that entire system, who you have to educate on the SBIR process. You have to educate them on how they can leverage this authority. You have to share that with the contracting officers. You have to see, do they have the know-how and knowledge to go down that direction?
Yeah, and do they have the resources that they need too? Just like a CEO or a founder, has a kitchen table cabinet, right? Like the folks on the other side of the aisle, like they have support services or sometimes they don't. So it's just as much about understanding what they have available and how to help them. I know somebody asked in the chat, Joey, a question about OSC funding. That is, Office of Strategic Capital is not a government entity that I have worked with. So I am not like able to answer the question about OSC funding deployment, but I will hand it over to you if you are.
Yeah. I personally have not been engaged with those funds and seeing how they're deploying. But what I have seen and sort of in that process and life cycle, I think a lot of these companies have gotten the green light and authorization and need to continue fundraising. So I mean, I need to go out and do some more research on this as well. But these companies that have gotten the OSC funding, I think, are still building their funds and their investment strategies that they then need to source companies for. That's where I think things are at, but I've not been deeply engaged in that in a while. So that's something I'll take a look at and learn as well. All right.
Yeah, same.
We have quite a few questions that maybe we can just dig into and keep sharing. The point of today's conversation was a conversation, so let's let the audience take us to where they want to go. Um, all right, so we got a question in that we are at TRL 4 already, and it is still tough to go after SBIRs and grants. They still take forever. Do we have any suggestions on how to handle the employee changes that continue to happen in the government sector as you build relationships and every 2 years chairs change? So what I read in that is like, hey, the military personnel are switching out every 2 years. How do I ensure that there is viability and a long-term vision? This is one of the biggest struggles we have in our Department of Defense and our democracy. Our leaders change over, which means we don't necessarily have a comprehensive leader who can take something all the way to the end. And that's one amazing thing about our private sector is you can have people at the helm of a company and they can drive that vision and product for the future. In the government, that doesn't always happen. But I would argue that you're seeing a lot of the military personnel change over in these positions. There are a lot of civilians that stay there. There's a lot of civilians that stay in these bills, stay in those positions. So who are the civilians in the leadership roles around your senior leaders? What are the actual written documents and requirements that people are putting in place for your capability? You know, if it's a written down requirement, if it's getting into the POM cycle, if there's, you know, you're getting doctrine built around this, if you're getting capability requirements built, then you're actually institutionalizing the requirement beyond the whims of that current commander or current leadership. And that effort it's a multi-year effort that you really have to understand who those stakeholders are. And yes, they're changing over every 2 years, but what that also means is that those cycles are usually offset. So you have the new person coming in a year after the other one did, and are you getting to know other people throughout this stack? I see a lot of companies make the mistake that, hey, we got our one person, and like they're our champion. And then my next question is, all right, well, who is up and down the chain of command from this person? Do we know all of those people? And the answer is often no, right? This is our champion. We have never talked to the commander. We've never talked to this person. We've never talked to the program office. Like, great. Our first task is to go build out the set of names and understand who they are, and then ask our champion to facilitate introductions to those people. This person already is our champion, already wants to engage. How can we help open up that conversation and engagement? And then one Doge comment around this is a lot of civilians have left. So you're seeing a huge cut in personnel. And so this equation has shifted and it might continue shifting in this administration. And so you might see less and less people in the civilian sector that can carry that and be that champion. But I also want to point out that the civilian workforce is not going to be eliminated. The civilian workforce is here. They're a core part of what we do and how we execute the mission in the DoD, and I want to continue seeing. I think you'll continue seeing people stay and be a part of that conversation.
You said it
All right.
perfect. Should we tackle another question?
Yeah. All right. We got a question from Ashish. Is there a repository to learn and match our product and DoD needs that could lead us to submit our proposal?
I wish.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. I think there's a few tools out there that are attempting to do this. I know of tools like uh, I think Mobilize Ignite has a good tool set that's out there trying to facilitate this exact uh, problem. Um, I know there's a lot of platforms that are providing government like intelligence, like Bloomberg Government Leadership Connect, Obvient. So great tools to sort of get insight onto that information. And so I personally am a fan of the Obvient tool set. It's something we use a lot within the Outpost. So there's not as the exact repository that's owned by the DoD. There's many people trying to tackle this problem. All right, next question from Pramod is dual use is tough for a small startup company. It's not realistic without budgets for both strands of BD, but many small companies who are defense only focused can be dual use. And are you seeing companies that are DoD focused eventually grow into dual use? You just described one example, but that seems to be the exception. What have you seen?
So I wanna challenge that a little bit because I don't think it's the exception. I think the ability to see your solution in another problem is a creative challenge, right? And a lot of times when we're working with founders of startups, you're not in a space where you can use your creative brain because you're in your space. You're trying to figure out how to pay bills and run companies and hire people and engineer things, right? But we did just finish a 10-week long accelerator program where we took 11 companies successfully through a dual use go to market strategy development. So we've got proof from 11 companies that both the commercial strategy and the defense focused strategy can be developed side by side with some energy and some support. And those companies are coming out of that accelerator. They're just 2 weeks fresh, right, out of this accelerator. But they have each already submitted for at least one SBIR grant or one OT proposal. A couple of the companies were higher maturity levels, so they now have larger RFPs in their sites, but they are actively going after defense related business and still continuing to support and pursue business on the commercial side with teams of less than 6 people. So it can definitely be done. I think success is more dependent on the use case, right? Seeing the problem and understanding how to tackle it, and then the founder's willingness to do the hard work.
I agree with that sentiment, and I would also argue that you need to have at least 2 to 400,000 set aside to just focus on DoD BD. So if you have that flexibility in your budget cycle or your flexibility in how you're executing your resources, something important to consider.
Yeah, can I just add on that really quickly, Joey? Because I think that that is something, um, maybe something that, the Mac network provides and support that is a little bit of a differentiator. Um,
Mhm.
so shameless, not just so shameless plug, right? Um, it's it's necessary for you to get the support you need. So combining, the question about is there one place where I can go and find this beautiful like utopia of needs, right? With the second question we're tackling on like how do we go from dual use into defense or, from commercial into defense, right? You've got to understand like the crux of both of those problems is somebody who understands how to hunt for business and how to find ways to sell to DoD, right? And that business development support, that very early, yeah, but who am I going to sell to and who wants my stuff, right? Questions, is what the Macs are designed to answer and what we're supposed to be doing to help the community. So I want to encourage people to reach out and use us for that reason, right? If you're like noodling on this and you just want to know, like, don't go and invest. Sorry for the capture managers out there. Don't go in and drop $100,000 on a salary for a capture manager. Like, come and see my team first, right? And we'll tell you honestly if there's a defense focus for your product. I promise I won't lie to you ever.
I want to second that. I think the Macs are a phenomenal resource to go to, and they're meant to help guide you through this process and provide that perspective. And I highly encourage everyone to go. And what I did hear is that Angela wants every single person on this phone call to go and ask and engage. And that's we want
Yes,
we
bring it on. Bring it on. My team that's on this call is all probably like, "Oh my God." But let's go. Bring it on.
we I think you guys can do it. I believe in you, and so we'll keep pushing folks your way as part of this. All right, we have a few more questions, and then I think we can rock and roll. Um, I Are you seeing delays with Air Force contracting? We were awarded and funded in February, but we're still waiting on a contract 4 months later on an Air Force Phase 2 SBIR. Yes, we are. We're definitely seeing those delays. A lot of the contracting shops that I'm aware of have had their personnel cut in half not necessarily by like people getting fired, but like people leaving and recognizing contracting folks know that they have a lot of value and they are going out and finding other opportunities. So the delayed resignation program has definitely had a huge impact on a lot of contracting shops because they are very civilian heavy. All right. What are our views on competitions such as XTech Search or DIU Dual Use University Accelerator Challenge?
I love them. I have to be honest, I
I
love
think that's
them.
the fastest answer we have. Yes.
I love them, and I love them for a very specific reason. So here's why I think these prize challenges and accelerators and things are cool, is because they rely on DoD engagement in a way that is outside of the traditional acquisition pathways. And so you are getting DoD folks to support those types of prize challenges and programs who already know they want to think outside the box. They want to engage with industry differently. They want to look at problems differently. And I think that's your best advantage as a founder and someone who's trying to sell to DoD, because you have already established that you can make a connection with that human, right? And you can think about how you sell differently. It does not change anything about what happens after. The cycle is still long. It still takes time. You still have to be open to the relationship. You still have to be willing to do some stuff outside of some funding pathways, like formal funding pathways. You still have to be a low risk proposition for contract, but they are fantastic door openers. And if you can leverage them, you should.
I second everything you said. So,
And I
all
was
right, we
not
got
paid for, nor am I endorsed by, any of those prize challenge programs.
no, but you love them and I love them and they're highly supportive of facilitating. So comment from Dustin, shout out to the Mac as they've been a great help to the company, the team at Deeper Breath for finding new spots in the DoD for products. So what I heard is a ringing endorsement to go engage with the team, which is what we want. All right, so we've come to the end of our questions. We have a comment here that I actually think will be worth digging into. But I encourage folks to, hey, if you have any questions, we have about 5-10 minutes left. And so happy to answer anything that you have on your mind. Angela and I have been chatting about a few different things today. And so want to leave the space for you to answer any other questions you might have. All right, we had a comment come in about contracting shops across the spectrum will be in big trouble. The government will start sweeping funds in July, and most offices haven't been able to execute the funds they have. Everyone should keep this in mind. Awards for O&M work will be pushed all the way to September. What are your first reactions on that?
My immediate first reaction is, tell me what's different about that than any other year we've been through in the last decade.
CR has been really difficult for a lot of government contracting shops, right? So like this is a process and a challenge. I actually think this just means more opportunity for companies, the companies that get their spend plans put together, that get the acquisition process, have a contracting officer, have a requirement written. Those folks that are ready and prepared are going to win. That's all this means. And yes, there's less people to execute, but the money still has to get obligated. So the easier you make it for your government stakeholder, the more likely it'll get done.
I agree. I think I think I would want to encourage people to resist the temptation to use the CR as a reason to do their best Chicken Little impersonation. Like the sky's not falling, right? I know it's not. We've been through that, right? Um, this is a door that can be opened. And if you are not ready, like Joey said, that's okay, because the next budget cycle, the next round of funding is coming, right? So be ready for that. Like, but be honest with yourself and really force, like if you're the founder here on this call, like really force your capture team and your BD team to be honest about what this looks like, because you need to be prepared. And it's not easy. It's not an easy time to be a business development professional in the DoD space in a CR environment where RFPs have been delayed, at a minimum, I would say, a month. In some situations, indefinitely, right? But the government still needs to buy things. So the budget cycle will write itself. And if you know what to expect in the future and you know how to prepare for that, you will be that company that's ready in the future, just like the company that's ready right now. Like, this is about your evolution and not just about whether or not the government is going to start cutting you contracts.
Yeah. And as our anonymous attendee has also jumped in and said, like, be ready to write your own requirements. Being prepared, your capture team being prepared is knowing how to write the requirements, getting the spend plan in place, getting a contract vehicle lined up, understanding what PEC code the program element code your funding is sitting in. That's what you have to do to be successful. Angela, I think there's $1 million question on the table. And this one,
Yes,
I
I'll
believe you'll
take it.
knock out of the park. Awesome. Uh, how do people contact you and the team? And how do they get engaged?
Yeah, I'll put our email into the chat. You can visit the Southwest Mac website and fill out a contact us form, or you can just send an email to solutions@swmac.org. I threw it in the chat, I think. Did I throw it into everyone? Maybe I didn't. Hold on. I'm learning how to use Zoom,
Yes.
guys.
Oh, no, I
Uh,
went to host and panelists.
um, I spend my day in Teams. You can feel bad for me. Please feel bad for me. And I would just like maybe some parting words if I could, like one last comment. I want everybody who's spent time with us today to understand something that I share first with any new founder I meet. And that is the need to understand how the acquisition cycle works from the perspective of who's the customer. So just really quickly, I want to explain that if you are engaging with an end user, a soldier, an airman, a Marine, a sailor who wants to hold onto your product and use it, right? You are engaging with an end user. You're not engaging with someone who has purchasing power, right? You need to follow the thread from the end user back into the program office. You need to follow the program office back into the budget. You need to follow the budget back into the command, right? And start to understand how the money will move through all of those things in order for you to deliver what the end user is asking you for. Because the end user cannot and will not, and honestly should not own any part of that acquisition process. They're telling you they want what you make and assuming that you know how to go get that to them, right? So if you are not familiar with terms like the major command and subcommand, with commander's intent, with the requirements development process, with contracting commands and how they integrate into program offices, with the J books, the justification books that comes out every year associated with the budget, with the program executive offices and the program managers, right? You need to get there. That's step one in customer discovery for building a go-to-market strategy. And if you don't put in the work to understand how all of that moves now, you will fall short of what you want to do when it comes to securing contracts to make your products.
I 100% agree. I want to expand upon that. I think that what you explained is actually step 1 through 40 there. And all the work that has to go through in there. It's not just step one, Angela. I think there's a lot of work that goes into that. And I share that a funny clip to say that there's a lot more of a conversation that we could have. I think you and I could talk for probably another 40 hours about each element that's broken down there. And there's a lot to decipher in how do you engage with a program office. How do you understand a J book? We could do an entire conversation on that part. And then what are the MAGCOM's priorities? What is the battalion's priorities? A a lot to answer and sort out there. So I hope we get to do more sessions like this, and maybe we'll dig into some of those topics, and maybe demystifying the J books could be a good one, and for a very niche audience who actually even know what J books are. But that I think could be a lot of fun.
For
So
everyone else, we'll just send you shots of espresso before the webinar starts so you can stay awake.
yes, that'll be part of our requirement. If you register for the webinar, get an address, we'll send you a shot of espresso so you actually stay awake while we blurry-eyed read through this, because Angela and I will have like 10 cups of coffee beforehand. So,
This was
Angela, I
awesome,
want to say
Joey.
thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Yeah, likewise. This was a great opportunity to just connect and maybe share some of the real live conversations you and I have had with folks. Appreciate all your support and everything that you're doing for the companies that you're working with. I want to give you a similar shout out. There isn't anybody in our space that is as successful as you are in helping founders with what they need. So if you are all not engaged with Outpost, you should be. So I'll insert the shameless plug on your behalf, Joey, because you guys are incredible and it's so much fun to work with you.
Thank you, Angela. It's awesome to work with your team as well. And I really just enjoyed doing the webinar, right? We got to share this knowledge, get people out there and get excited. So thank you very much for doing that. I had a lot of fun in this hour, and thank you for your time.
Likewise. Thanks, everybody. Hope you all have a great day. I hope to talk to all of you soon. All 100 or whatever of you that there.
Cool. Thanks all. See ya.